So without further ado, we will move to the very first question, and this one is for CJ. CJ, you serve as a virtual CISO for several organizations. What are some of the challenges CISOs have been facing throughout this past year, especially with the move to a remote workforce?
Thanks, Nick, and good morning, everybody. I mean, the challenges have been vast. It's been a crazy year, something we've never seen before, and obviously the pandemic has hit a lot of us really hard and caused a lot of changes. I come from a long military background, 21 years, where we train for everything. We try to be prepared for everything, and since my transition to the private sector and talking to a lot of CFOs and CEOs and talking about business continuity and how do we sustain operations in any kind of event, and every time we get to a pandemic, the answer would be, that's never going to happen. That would never happen. And voila, a pandemic happened. And what happened is, these companies who are cloud hosted really weren't too affected. Maybe they had enough devices, mobile devices, laptops to send them home and start working from the cloud environment in that way. These companies that were on-prem, quickly were transitioning to, I got to get on the cloud. We got to be able to keep working, and we can't be in our office anymore because we shut down, really most of the country, most of the world. So that transition to a remote workforce has really been a huge challenge. I can't tell you how many companies that had the on-prem that was primarily desktops, and all of a sudden they went out and they bought 50 laptops and they just sent their employees home. And with what controls? There wasn't any identification, authentication requirements. They're not using VPN. They're just it really became ad hoc, and the level of security really dropped to a very high risk, which was a low level of security. So really, that's been the big thing that as a CISO, and that many other CISOs have been dealing with the last year is that really that heightened risk, but the lower security for all levels.
Awesome. Thank you very much, CJ. And I'm going to put out the same question to you, Ian, and then Jerry. What are some of the challenges CISOs have been facing throughout this past year, especially with the move to a remote workforce? Ian, you are on mute.
Thanks, Nick. So it's funny that there you go. There's one of the issues that we've all been struggling with for the last 18 months. You're on mute. So it's funny CJ talks about sort of pandemic and pandemic response, in that we were working with a client tail end of last year, tail end of 2019, coming into 2020, around mobile device management. And it was a long-running project. We weren't really getting moving with it very quickly. They were dragging their feet. And when the pandemic hit, they suddenly kicked into high gear. And one of the people we were working with, her job title was actually Pandemic Response Coordinator. And I couldn't believe that somebody actually had that as part of their job title and part of their responsibilities. So it was great to actually see somebody that was that prepared. So the things that we've seen, I think CJ hit on some of the points, like people just randomly buying laptops at Best Buy and various other places and giving them to employees so that they can try and work from home, and the knock-on effect of that with regards to security. But also companies that had VPNs, you size a VPN for 10% of your workforce maybe. And what we saw was a lot of people, their VPN capacity just completely overloaded, so people not able to connect and not able to work. And so CISOs and IT managers looking for solutions to that problem. And they solved it in a variety of different ways, some through VPN capacity, adding additional capacity, and some people through using things like Windows Virtual Desktop in Azure and hosting virtual desktop sessions, and just getting their employees working through using their own laptop device or their own home computer and just connecting through WVD. So there's been a lot of challenges for CISOs around that, like how do you just get people working in a secure way? And what tools do they have? They often don't know what licensing they have, what capability they already have. So there's just a lot of confusion and a lot of rushed implementations. Jerry.
Thank you, Ian, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. You know, what I've been noticing, so I'm connected typically more to the user side of the SharePoint world, the OneDrive world, the Teams world. And as you know, there was a huge push with Teams meetings, right? And then everybody was competing with Zoom meetings. And then we had the security issues with people getting into those meetings in inappropriate fashions, even in the education space, which was kind of disruptive, right? So I'm finding that companies were forced into this so quickly that they couldn't really nail down standards for things like, will our company have standard corporate backgrounds that everyone will use in their Teams meetings? Notice this meeting here. We like the personality of, you know, as much as I hate Manchester soccer, I'm a Chelsea fan. I like the soccer background that Ian's showing. So I find that that was really something that people had to do quickly without any time to get ready for it. And whenever we rush things, sometimes balls get dropped, especially some of the security bells and whistles. I've also noticed that, you know, people worked from home before, some people, but they typically work normal schedules, right? 9 to 5, 7 to 3, 8 to 4, whatever. But now, because we're all juggling kids and life and spouses and all these other things, the day shifts have changed. There's gaps in the middle of the day sometimes where when I went to an office, I could rely on a buddy that might know where to find a document. How do I do this process? Now there's a self-service model. So there's a much more, there's increased awareness and attention into projects like internet, IA overhauls. I need people to find things quickly. We see bot-driven things popping up, but we'll get into more of that later today, but I think that's fine for this. Back to you, Nick.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Jerry. I'm now going to move on to the next question. What are some of the various updates and features Microsoft has released to address these concerns? I'm going to give this one to Ian first, then Jerry, and then CJ if you wanted to add anything. So I'm going to give it to you first, Ian. You are on mute again, Ian.
You'd think I'd learn. It's only been 12 months. So there's a lot of functionality that Microsoft has previously released to support remote work and security, and it's constantly evolving. So if you look at traditionally, everybody's inside the firewall, so I'm just going to rely on my firewall to protect me and we'll be safe. Those days are long since gone. Identity is your control plane for security. It's really about the identity and protecting the identity. And Microsoft has a lot of tooling around this. There's features in what's called Azure AD P1 and P2 that let you do things like identity protection. So if your username and password is leaked on the dark web, and let's say you're using another, say, social media site or some work-related help site, and you see the username, it gets compromised along with the password. Microsoft is checking that password against what they have in Azure AD. And if it gets a match, it's going to notify you of what's called a leaked credential. And you can automatically remediate that depending on the features that you have licensed, so that you can automatically notify the user that they have a leaked credential and that they should change their password. So there's a lot of capability there around identity protection. MFA obviously is another big one that they've had for a while and that we encourage all of our users to implement, particularly with the Authenticator app. So not relying on text messaging. But when you look at device management, Microsoft in the last few years has put a lot of effort into what they call threat protection. So there's a suite of products there for threat protection. They have a lot of tooling around discovery of malware and automatic remediation on the device. So we're starting to see people roll out Microsoft Defender onto their laptop devices as part of their defense in depth strategy for security on the endpoint. So what's nice about that is that it feeds into the rest of the Microsoft ecosystem so that you can leverage some of the single panes of glass so that you can see all your threats across all your devices in sort of one place. So there's a lot of work they put there. As people move to the working from home, this need to manage the device has become really important. We used to rely on GPO. So you'd be in the office, you connect to AD, you get your GPOs, and you would get your policies defined and your machine would get updated. with more people working from home and less people trying to avoid using the VPN because of the issues on capacity, but you still need to connect to AD to refresh security tokens, etc. People are trying to avoid that and solve that issue, so they're moving to things like Intune for management. Intune does a really good job of managing the device, both Windows 10, Mac, and mobile devices. And they're continuing to invest a lot of money in this. They've started to move more and more capability into Intune with things like the endpoint settings policies, so that you can control more and more of the capability that you would do through GPO, you can now do through Intune, so that you can really start to manage the device from the cloud. So we've done some work with customers that includes registering their serial numbers with Azure, so that if the device does get stolen, it can only tie back to their corporation, so that you can force basically the policy back down. So if it does get stolen, you can reformat, etc., and reinstall all your stuff. So we're seeing a lot of work around that. Part of that is also surface reduction, attack surface reduction, so patching machines through Intune and leveraging a lot of that capability, using MDM and MAM. So a lot of people have BYOD policies because they didn't want to buy phones for everybody, so they're doing BYOD, but you still want to manage that corporate data on the device. And so a lot of companies are deploying MAM policies, mobile application management. So that gives you control. It's sort of like a sandbox on the phone, and depending on if it's iPhone or Android, it's presented differently, but it's basically bucketing the corporate information into a secure area so that you can more easily remove it or wipe it when an employee leaves, for example, or the device is compromised. So we've seen investments there. We're also seeing a lot of investments in Azure Sentinel, which is their SIEM, the Security Information and Event Management System. I love Sentinel as it provides us a single pane of glass to pull in all the information about Azure AD usage, other applications that are using Azure AD for authentication. It's pulling in information about endpoint management and endpoint devices, and it brings it all into one place, and it enables us to do things like password spray attack notification, password brute force attacks, and really notify SecOps that those things are happening. So there's a ton of investment, there's a ton of capability that's already there that a lot of people have purchased and they just don't know is there and that they can leverage. And so one of the things that we've been doing a lot of is workshops around security for both sort of identity security and endpoint security and remote work security. So doing those workshops that Microsoft funds gives us an opportunity to work with customers, deploy some of the higher licensing into the environment in a trial basis, so that you can then let them experience what it looks like and the features that it has and how it can protect them. And then from there, they can learn about the products and then make a purchase decision if it's appropriate for them. And in some cases, we're seeing that as a cost cutout. So you may have another feature, another product that you can now, through adoption of Microsoft technology, sort of over time remove or keep a defense in depth strategy. So maybe you have multiple antivirus products, for example. So that's a lot from me. I'm going to hand it over to Jerry.
Thank you, Ian. So again, pivoting back to the Teams world, you know, this modern workplace space that I tend to talk to customers a lot. I find that, you know, like all the products, Microsoft is constantly adding fantastic enhancements to the feature set. You know, what I've seen most impactful in this new normal, right, this COVID world we're living in, is things like Teams breakout rooms. So this is perfect because you think about an office, you'd have a big meeting in a conference room, then people might go off into little side rooms and they're all tasked to come back with their findings for whiteboarding or wireframing or whatever. Breakout rooms are a fantastic tool that allow you to do that electronically. And the moderator can pop in and out of breakout rooms. You can make an announcement so that all the breakout rooms get the same message at the same time, and then you can simply get rid of the breakout rooms and congeal and gel everybody back into the main meeting room, which is pretty cool. So that's been very impactful. I've noticed things like adding urgent tags to team chats. So getting people to really get your, one of the good things about all these tools is I can reach out and touch anybody whenever I want, but there's this sense of being overloaded sometimes with managing an inbox and now managing your team's activity. But I find that the ability to take a chat and change its urgency to bring a graphical awareness to a user in Teams, and it'll actually email the person as well, is a nice feature. Putting the security hat on for a second in regards to Teams, we've seen a lot of interest in companies wanting to leverage team sensitivity labels. So for those of you that aren't aware of what that entails, essentially it adds a level of security to Teams deployment and Teams creation without taking away every user's ability to create a team. So in essence, when a user clicks create team, the first thing they're asked for is, what's the security label? What's the sensitivity label for this team? And that's where you set, oh, this is internal access only, this team. This is this team, this is this team. So you can have multiple label settings. And the neat thing there is the user then has to pause, and she has to think, okay, this is internal only. Once I set that, I then cannot add external entities into that team. Even though technically as a tenant I can for other teams, it allows the user to stop and pause and flag the content and be more aware of what should be shared outside our walls and what should stay inside the constructs of our tenant. So that's a neat little feature. It's called team sensitivity labels. I'm seeing, as good as all these features are, I think the platform still could use some work. For example, Teams meeting passwords is something that is getting a lot of heat lately, and that's soon to be released from what I've heard. Speaking of soon to be released, as we're speaking today, presently the Microsoft Ignite conference is going on right now live, and I encourage all of you to stay in contact with the announcements both throughout this week and next week. You can watch all the replays of those to hear about the exciting things happening. Most recently, yesterday, there was an announcement about some significant enhancements in the area of fine-tuning sensitive information types and data loss prevention rules. So under the Microsoft Information Protection umbrella, there's many feature sets that companies are taking advantage of to keep track of their content, where it's going, who has access to it, and limiting mistakes with data getting into the wrong hands, both internal and external. And we leverage Azure Information Protection for that, as well as data loss prevention technologies. Again, for those of you that aren't aware of that, think of data loss prevention as an overlay of security that can be applied to Teams and SharePoint and OneDrive and all these products that look for certain patterns of data structures. So it could be social security numbers, medical record numbers, internal product codes, secret keywords. Based on those rules, it triggers and applies policies for the user to respond to, or some could be overridden. One other thing I'll note before passing the mic back to CJ, actually, given he's a Coast Guard guy, we should say helm, right? We'll pass the helm to CJ. But keep in mind that our data sometimes isn't always in SharePoint. As much as we would like companies to stay with one, people are still using external cloud storage like Dropbox. But through leveraging cloud app security, we can protect our data even though it's living in a different cloud storage vessel. And that's leveraging things like Azure Rights Management, used to be called Information Rights Management, IRM, and Microsoft sort of rebranding some of these and consolidating some of the admin portals. But keep that in mind, because oftentimes it's not as easy as just telling a company to go all in on Microsoft, right? There are other technologies, especially in the area of document storage, whether you're talking about Ignite. We see that in the pharmaceutical industry to a great deal, and other products, obviously, like Dropbox and Box and so on and so forth. So, CJ, I will pass the helm to you, sir.
I pulled an E and I was almost talking without unmuting myself. So no, thanks for passing up. As I say, lookout up here. I listened to you, Ian, and you, Jerry, and I was taking notes, and I was looking for certain things, and it was going to really push to what I was speaking to, which was layered security. Right? Everything you guys talked about that Microsoft has introduced is just putting layer upon layer upon layer of security. things that I wrote down while you were talking with device encryption and identity protection and threat protection and DLP, data loss prevention, and all these layers that we put in for security to help protect our environment, to protect the sensitive data that we process. And from in some cases as a third party or as a vendor or as a customer, we're charged with protecting somebody else's sensitive information. So we take on a lot of that responsibility. The other thing I was looking, and I was really that overarching idea was under zero trust. And anybody who knows me would say you're not a zero trust guy. I get to know people, I talk to them, I trust them. And if anybody knew what I did for work, they would never believe me, just because of that personality and that approach. But I'm a zero trust guy when it comes to this. And the example I can give you is my sweet 89-year-old grandmother. And she is the sweetest person in the world, and she trusts everybody. Every single person who calls her asking for money, she wants to give it to them. And I have to say, Nana, trust nobody. Zero trust, right? And again, in this environment, we have to have zero trust. Zero trust is you ask for my authentication, you give me two-factor authentication. I put my username, my password in. You send me something that makes me validate that it's me, and so you trust me, right? So I've gained that trust. But you stop trusting me after 8 hours. So after 8 hours, I don't trust you anymore. I got to make sure you're still the same person, and no one has jumped in your shoes and is acting like you. So really, what Microsoft has put in and what we're doing here is putting in that layer of security to really support that zero trust mantra that we've put in here. That's all from me, Nick.
No, it's a great point, CJ. So I'm going to jump in there, Nick, and throw you off course. Zero trust is, I forgot to mention that. That is sort of core and fundamental to everything that we do and the way that Microsoft positions their security stack. So they sort of have three principles: verify explicitly, use least privilege access, which we see a lot with using features in Azure AD called PIM, Privileged Identity Management. So really only giving people the access that they need. So use least privilege access, and then assume breach, right? Assume that you've already been compromised, and that way you can go looking for things and make sure that you're in a better position. So yeah, absolutely. Zero trust is the way to go. And identity is sort of that first plane that you need to get a good handle on. Sorry, Nick, I'll let you go.
Quite all righty, and I'm just glad your mic is working this time around.
See, you can teach an old dog new tricks.
Awesome, guys. A lot of solid information there. I'd just like to remind everyone, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, post them in the Q&A feature and we will get to them at the end of the presentation. This next question is for CJ. Throughout your virtual CISO engagement, CJ, are you finding that the IT security leaders within these organizations are aware of all the security features Microsoft has to offer, and do they know how to implement them?
Short answer is no, they don't know they exist. No, they don't know how to implement them, and a lot of it is really based on how fast they were thrust into it. A lot of organizations, before they go to a cloud solution, like Microsoft or some of these others, there's years and years and years of strategic planning and how we're going to go about it, and hours and hours and hours of what we would probably consider wasteless meetings and time wasting. And at what point we see a squirrel and we take off, so now we're gonna have another meeting tomorrow to recapture what we're trying to talk about. So the answer is no, and they haven't been prepared for it. What they do is they've done a good job of asking. A lot of these companies, a lot of these organizations have regulations they need to comply with, whether it's a security framework or they're familiar with best practice. They have a third party like us that comes in and tells them that you need to do those things, and a lot of them care. A lot of them, there's some companies out there who are trying to check a box based on a requirement, based on a regulation, based on a third party asking for this information. But the ones who really have thrust into this and were forced merely by a pandemic are familiar with it. They didn't have time to train, and then once they realized they needed it, there wasn't any classes available. So they're really asking questions as to what do I do, and asking these third parties such as Spyglass, what can I do, what can I implement, and does this align with what the best practices are from a security standpoint? So really trying to make that connection, but really again. Made it a long answer, but really short answer is they don't. They just don't have the training. They don't have the knowledge of it. And then some of these companies don't have I don't want to say infrastructure. They don't have the employee base. They don't have the departments in house to manage these things and make these changes on a timely basis. They can't see something's not working and then fix it immediately because they don't have the personnel in house. So looking for that third party to help them, and maybe they don't have it. They haven't set something like that up. So again, a lot of that was, again, it comes down to unprepared. Some of these companies were prepared for again, not on purpose, I would say, for a pandemic like we've been through. But those who were prepared are really, really in the cloud and had that familiarity with it, are really just through the roof success-wise over this last year. And those who maybe weren't prepared are really kind of struggling. And then it ties back to that security sense, go back to that layered security. They don't really have it because they weren't prepared for it.
Awesome. Thank you very much, CJ. I'm going to ask the same question to you, Ian, and then you, Jerry, as well. On the projects you are involved in, are you finding that IT security leaders are aware of the features Microsoft has released to aid in protecting their organization?
So yeah, as CJ said, the short answer to that is no. We've been working with a client recently who I think had taken a good look at the Microsoft stack and come to a realization that the Microsoft toolset is actually a viable toolset to use for security, and that they've made enormous leaps and bounds over the last few years. So they really are adopting the full Microsoft stack. So they're going to what's called EMS E5. So they're going to get all the security features. So Microsoft buckets their security features really into four pieces. So identity and access management, threat protection, information protection, and cloud security. They sort of break cloud security out as a separate thing because it's more than just the Microsoft clouds. It's actually looking at some of the other SaaS tools and things like that. So yeah, a lot of customers just don't know the capability. They have maybe purchased it and don't know how to use it and don't know how to deploy it. Some customers are just completely overwhelmed. They know they need to do something, but they just don't know where to start. And so we have some workshops that we'll do with them that Microsoft can fund. So that gets them sort of heading in the right direction without having to outlay any money and get some of that education. But we are seeing that, you know, understanding where to start is often the problem. And so one of the tools we use helps customers identify what their business drivers are and what their internal and external forces are that are pushing them to do security work. And then across those four buckets of IAM, threat protection, information protection, cloud security, there's a series of topics that we will ask them to self-rate on how good are we at this versus how important this is for us to improve. And so by doing that, you get a really nice scatter chart that lets you understand, okay, maybe we need to focus more on, say, administration, access management, and really controlling our high privileged users. And that's a great way for us to then start with the customer and say, okay, now we're going to start to use some of the features that are in, say, ADP1, or we'll talk through the features of ADP2 so that you can do things like PIM, so privileged identity management, which is where you will have a user who can be, say, a global administrator or can be a SharePoint administrator and Teams administrator, but they use a dedicated account for that only gets those rights when they elevate in. So they'll log in, they'll say, I need to do XYZ, I need this privilege. You can put a approval process around that, but that gets you in a much better spot for identity management. And so from there, you can then go to, say, entitlement management. So one of the things we see a lot of problem with is guest access. Now that we're working a lot more using SaaS platforms and inviting guests into our collaboration platforms, one of the problems we see frequently is I have guest users, but I don't know where they need access to. I don't know whether or not they should still have access. And so that lifecycle management of access and identity into our platform is often something that customers are really struggling with. So by using things like entitlement management, you can create an entitlement for, say, project A, And if you're on Project A, you get access to this SharePoint site, this team, and these Azure AD groups that then grant you access into, say, Azure resources. So that gives us a tool to help them manage that part of their business if that is their highest priority. Conversely, some people are more concerned with information protection, in which case Jerry will take the lead on that, and I'll let him talk about how we drive IP related discussion. So yeah, it's really a mixed bag of some customers know that they need to improve, but don't know how to start and don't know what tools they have. Some know the tools they have and need help just implementing or fine tuning some of the deployments so that they can get the most out of the tools. Jerry.
Thank you, Ian. So in summary, I sort of agree with both CJ and Ian, and I don't want to reiterate too much of what they've already stated. I will add, so again, the short answer is no, I really don't think there is a great awareness of the security features, and I'll talk specifically about a few. And I think this awareness issue goes beyond just the security features. I think I see a lack of awareness of the value of the entire platform, right? So today we're focusing really on security, and I'll pivot back to that in a moment. But recently I was in a meeting with C-suite of a global organization, and I was really tasked with showing them the value of this platform. Show them sort of, if everything was wired together and everything was lit up, where could this take the organization? And nobody in the room had any idea what the platform could do for them. You know, I think people buy Office 365 sometimes because, well, everybody else is doing it and we want to go to the cloud and we're all Microsoft and we don't like AWS, so let's just buy it. But that next step of, okay, we purchased it, what are we going to do with this? How are we going to leverage this to be more competitive, to be more efficient, to get rid of competing projects, products meaning. So for example, I might be running Mimecast and Proofpoint, but I purchased E5 with all the security bells and whistles. You might want to do a compare contrast bake-off because you likely don't need to be spending all the money you're spending on all those third-party products just because, quote, you've always thought that was the best of breed. Microsoft now competes with best of breed. They are best of breed, top quadrant player, and that's a great opportunity for cost savings. So again, what Ian was referring to are things like, AIP and DLP and document retention policies and all these security related things. The short answer is no. I find there is generally a lack of awareness, which as a consulting organization gives us a great opportunity to come in, teach, train, raise awareness, build strategy and road mapping and planning. Most specifically, just to wrap up my comments here, the launch of this new Power Platform, and now that they're flagging and labeling business users as, quote, citizen developers or low code, no code deployment, there are a lot of security ramifications and support ramifications of having somebody in finance build something in their own that reaches out and touches other data sets, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one area that I think there has definitely been increased focus on. Obviously, Microsoft is all in lately with Teams and Power Platform as well. In closing, I would say due to this lack of awareness, sometimes companies try to do it on their own. They try to say, well, I've got a staff of really smart IT guys, they can figure this out. And sometimes we see that work, but oftentimes we see that fail more often than work. And we would just recommend that, this is a big beast and just be careful what, we think you can just take on. So anyway, with that, I will pass it back to Nick. Thank you.
Actually, Joe, I'm going to jump in there, and I think you raise a really good point there, Ray, which often in large organizations, a group of users may want to adopt something like Power Platform, for example, which is a great example, but the IT group doesn't understand it. The security group is terrified of yet another platform. And so the answer is no. And so one of the things that I think we can really help customers with and understand is we know how to adopt and deploy these platforms so that we can come in and say, okay, IT, we're going to need to think about these things. These are, your group wants to use Power BI. So we need to talk about, say, a data gateway strategy. And here's the things that you need to think about. So we can box that for you and help you understand. Security, I understand, and compliance, you have your set of concerns. So there's things that we can do in, say, Power Platform to put governance and security in place around environment strategy so that data that is considered corporate maybe can't go to places that are considered non-corporate, like, say, Twitter. So there's things that we can do there. So as people that have knowledge and experience with the platforms, we can sort of play the man in the middle and calm everybody down and make sure that everybody's concerns are heard, so that we can roll these platforms out so that people can be more productive and can really leverage the power of these platforms in a safe and secure way, so that the CISO can feel like, yeah, everything's good, I've put the guardrails in place, and now I can just let the business innovate and move at the speed of business.
Great answers, Ian and Jerry and CJ. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Moving on to the final scheduled question. What action items would you send viewers home with today regarding their Microsoft implementations and the various security features available to them? We'll start with Ian and then Jerry and allow CJ to add on if he wishes.
So, good question. Where to start? I'm going to wait. There we go. I would say if you don't have a good story around identity management and privileged access management, that is the place to start. In a cloud-based world, it's all about identity and making sure that your users are protected, that they are using things like MFA, you're using features like risky user and risky sign-in, which Microsoft, as you log into the cloud platforms, will look at where's the user coming from, what's the IP address, is this usual for this user, what kind of thing are they doing, how frequently have they used this endpoint, or how frequently are they logging in, and they'll get a risk score assigned to not just that user, but also that specific sign-in. And so you can then use conditional access policies to say, okay, this user looks a little bit risky, I'm going to do an MFA challenge. Or sorry, this sign-in looks a little bit risky, so I'm going to do an MFA challenge. Or if the user account is, say, looks very risky or has been compromised because you're leveraging leaked credential detection, you can force the user to do a password reset, which in turn will do an MFA challenge. So really enabling users to do things like self-service password reset and really getting a good handle on identity and access management is, if you don't have that already squared away, I would start there and then move out from there into sort of device management, device strategy. Typically DLP will come somewhere in the life cycle, depending on priority, and then cloud access, but you've got to start with identity.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ian. I'm going to ask the same question of you, Jerry. What action items would you send viewers home with today regarding their Microsoft implementations and the various security features available to them?
Thank you, Nick. I'm going to keep my comments really short and concise here. I would sort of put these into a few buckets. Number one, when it comes to security, we all know what our greatest risks are. It's our users. Focus on training, focus on awareness, but don't rely on your users to make the best choices all the time. So to the degree possible, leverage technology, leverage auto tagging versus manually tagging. So the more we can take out of the decision points and users making mistakes for security things, try to do that through leveraging technology. Use things like phishing tests. Make sure every now and then you're not just using those tests to find the person that doesn't know it. Celebrate good action. Use teams like Praise Tool. There's a new app called the Incentives app. Find a way to incentivize and reward good behavior in the security umbrella. Secondly, take time to really learn and experience the security offerings at a very deep and intimate level. This can be done through leveraging a partner, well, not any partner, Spyglass or Compass IT, to run you through a Microsoft CIE environment. What that is it's a very short pre-built environment called, it stands for Customer Immersion Experience. And we spin these up all the time for clients and for prospects and opportunities. to show them how it all looks when everything is woven together. People say, hey, I don't have an E5. I have no idea what DLP and AIP even is. We're interested. Can you show me? That's what these environments are for. So take advantage of those tools because they're out there at your fingertips, and there's funds available to help with some of that planning on the front end. Microsoft wants you to be using these tools. We want you to be using these tools. So there's options to get in there and share the investment there. That's about it. Again, I wanted to keep them really simple to those two concepts. And CJ, I'll turn it over to you if you have anything to add.
Thanks, Jerry. I'll make sure I wasn't on mute again. Thanks, Jerry. I appreciate it, Ian. So I'll just kind of piggyback on that, and I'll kind of take maybe a different angle on that piggyback. There's no wrong answers here. Pay attention to what your environment has. What are you protecting? What's the value of what you're trying to protect? Make sure that the proper security features are enabled that need to be enabled. And again, as Jerry said, make that list out as to what features you have, what is enabled, does it need to be, should it be, why isn't it? Ask yourself those questions. There's no wrong answers. From a security standpoint, from a macro security standpoint, go through an assessment. Whether it's something you're doing yourself and you can give yourself the honest answer and point out the things that you're not doing well. As a human being, we're trained to do things that we do really well and just keep doing it. We don't practice the things we're not very good at. So with that mindset, go through and identify the things that you aren't doing. Even if it's something that gives you that pit in your stomach, go through the process of identifying that. Whether it's something you can do internally, you can use a third party, like Spyglass or Compass. Go through that drill to understand what we're trying to comply with, what those best practices are, what that framework maps out for us to do. And then from there, what does Microsoft do for us as it relates to that? That's going to cut off a huge chunk of what you need to do. So again, really go through that process, identify those risks. Again, the worst thing we can do is ignore that risk. Identify that risk. If it's a risk you have to accept, you have to accept the risk. If that's what you determine as an organization, that's fine. Accepting a risk is nothing wrong with that. Ignoring the risk is where we have the problem. So again, go through that process, identify what's in place and what's not in place, and move forward and start fixing it.
Awesome. Thank you very much, CJ. You guys kept right on schedule. We're at exactly 46 minutes from when we started this presentation. So that concludes the scheduled portion of questions. We're now going to address the questions posted by audience members and give everyone one more chance. If you'd like to right now, post a question in the Q&A and we will get to it. So the first question, and I'm going to do all these questions and I'm going to put them all out to all three of you guys, starting with Ian, Jerry, then CJ, and we'll just do it in that order for any questions to follow. So starting with you, Ian, this is the first question. You have discussed lots of features. How do they actually work together?
That is a good question. So I actually have an infographic or a slide that we can walk through. So Alex, if you can push that live so that everybody can see, and let me know when you've done that.
All set.
All right, thank you. So you're right. I mentioned a whole bunch of things like EMS, E5, E3, ADP2, yada, yada, yada. There's a lot of feature. So the way I like to think about this is a great slide for showing sort of the walkthrough. So if you start with, there we go, the user, right? You've got things like MFA. You've got Hello for Business, which is really using biometrics to gain access into your Windows devices. You've got Defender for Identity, things like that. So there's all these user signals that come into the Azure conditional access engine. So you leverage some of those features to protect and to gain information and signal data about the identity. And then from there, you can also, using things like Intune, which is part of EMS E3. Intune lets you manage the device and gain access or knowledge about the device on things like whether or not it's compliant, where compliance is defined as not jailbroken, has a PIN, complexity of a certain thing, a certain length, that kind of stuff. You've also got endpoint management, so you know whether or not the machine has been patched, has certain applications installed. So depending on the level of Intune license you have, you can get a lot of information, as well as is this a managed device? So like a Windows 10 device, for example, could be managed, as could a iPhone. From there, you're going to feed that into the policy engine. So as I mentioned, you've got sign-in risk and user risk. So the conditional access engine will evaluate all these signals. The user's on a non-compliant device. They're trying to gain access to SharePoint. I'm gonna do an MFA challenge. Just sign in looks a little bit risky, so I'm gonna do an MFA challenge. So you can leverage those bits of information to do risky user and risky sign-in. So that's sort of on the front end. You've also got Microsoft doing dark web scanning, right? So as part of ADP2 and identity protection, they're going out onto the dark web, they're looking for your credentials, and they're taking any passwords that they see with the email, looking into Azure AD globally. Is that username and password combination anywhere in Azure AD, and do they have an ADP2 license? In which case, I'm going to notify you that you've got a leaked credential. And at that point, conditional access can do force the password reset. And because as a good cloud-based organization, you've implemented self-service password reset, you can now remediate that issue immediately and have the user reset their password so that that leaked credential is now no longer valid. So from there, the conditional access engine will let you gain access into the resources that you're trying to get to. Now, if it's something like Office 365, you can not just do a go, no-go decision, but you can also do, well, for this session, because they're on, say, a non-compliant device, I am going to allow you to read that document in a web browser, but I'm not going to let you download it. So you can do session-based restrictions. Looking at things like cloud infrastructure, you've got all of that gets applied to Azure resources as well. So you can do conditional access into, say, the Azure management plane. Other applications like AWS, anything that's really using Azure AD for single sign-on, you can monitor and restrict access to those resources based on your conditional access policies. And the level of control that you get, I think the yellow boxes come with EMS E5 because what you need there is what's called Microsoft Cloud App Security, so the CASB. So with those higher SKUs, you get these additional features. If you've got legacy apps, you can create an application in Azure AD, and you can then leverage the Azure AD proxy. So now, if you have a legacy app that's maybe using Windows authentication that you normally have a user VPN into on-prem so that they can then connect to that application using their AD credentials, now you can front end that with Azure AD and the proxy, so you can leverage all the conditional access capability, like is this user from a suspicious place, etc. So that's a lot of powerful capability. Jerry's talked about AIP, so Azure Information Protection. That's basically encrypting documents. So I don't care where they go, whenever the user tries to open them, it's going to call home to Azure AD and make a go, no-go decision on whether or not you can see the document. And if you can see it, can you print it, can you edit it, or just merely look at it? And if so, for how long? And then finally, Intune, you've got the company store. You can publish applications out. You can do all your patch management. You can create mobile application management policies so that you create those safe zones of corporate data. So that's sort of everything on the left is identity protection and threat protection. And we're not even getting into sort of the endpoint protection, really, and really digging in for Defender for endpoints where you're doing antivirus, etc. And the things on the right are sort of conditional access, information protection, CASB access, and things like that. So all of those tools give you these capabilities, and depending on how much of the SKU you've purchased, you get certain features. So that's all I've got to say about that.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ian. I'll open it up to CJ, Jerry. Did you guys have anything you wanted to add to that?
I'll just say this is great. This is great, and again, really speaks to that layered security, and is great to show how they all work together.
Yeah, I agree. Nothing to add. Well done, Ian.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I have two more questions. The first one is for IT and cybersecurity grads of 2021. Would you say that leveraging our knowledge of Azure AD versus traditional Windows Server AD has increased in importance because of the pandemic? I'll give that one to you again, Ian, and then Jerry and CJ, if you want to add on.
Yeah, I would say absolutely. We're seeing a lot of industry move to cloud, right? And they're deploying infrastructure in the cloud. They're adopting PaaS services. So I would absolutely do a lot of work with Azure AD. There is some there are some courses that you can study with Microsoft. So there's MS 500, which deals with sort of more the Jerry side of the world, to do with AIP, DLP, and those kinds of things. So you could look at that course material and understand security from that point of view. You've then got AZ 500, which is the Azure side of the house, which will get into things like securing Kubernetes as well as identities, etc. And then there's also AZ 100 and 104, I think it is, which are training around Intune, device management, and things like that, and how you can leverage those, along with MD 100, which is the desktop management. So looking at those courses will help you understand the security features that Microsoft has and where you want to focus.
Perfect. Jerry, CJ, anything you guys wanted to add?
No, nothing to add. Well done, Ian, again.
Yeah, Nick, real quick, I'll just add that, that absolutely with what Ian said, that, seeing a lot of that move from the on-prem to the cloud, gives these 2021 grads, a great opportunity to leverage that knowledge and bring it to whatever workplace they go to. So again, keep up with that, and best of luck to you.
Perfect. I'm going to give this final question over to Jerry to take. This one is, hi, I wanted to know more on what kind of security features can be added to Microsoft Teams.
Excellent, great question. In the interest of time, I'll sort of stay high level and be brief on these. Love to talk more about these, so please reach out after the webinar. We'll go deeper. So at a high level, when you look at team security, of course, you can first of all decide, like I talked about earlier, the sensitivity rules and sensitivity labels can help flag that team as being only available for internal, external. We can also obviously keep track of who's a member of the team. And we can also have guest access, and we can change what guest people can do, what member people can do. So it's all policy managed in Teams. So everything down to if someone's trying to pull a tab into Teams and you don't want to show any non-Microsoft apps, or maybe there's only specific apps you want people to be able to interact with, we can go very fine-tuned and very detailed in how we manage that. Data loss prevention, things you've already talked about, AIP, they all work in Teams as well. So AIP can go so far as to say, if I have a PowerPoint slide deck and I'm trying to share that PowerPoint deck, share my screen, not share the file, just click share screen, and it knows that people on the call don't have rights to that content, it will not let me share that screen. So it's very smart. It's not just limiting what I can email, right? These concepts are very deep and very involved. Document retention rules, and some clients are asking for some interesting things. Some are asking for, can you auto delete all my chat messages a day after I send them? So people are a little concerned about the findability and the e-discovery and some of the pervasive chat history being there forever. So some clients are asking for some interesting things that fall in line with their internal HR and legal policies. And specifically one, like I said, is a client that recently wanted their chat history deleted a day after send. So yes, some interesting things pop up like that. I know that was fast, but in the interest of time, we'll have to stick with that. Thank you for your time today. Nick, back to you for closeout.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jerry. CJ, Ian, quickly, anything you wanted to add?
No, great job, Jerry.
Yep, good job, guys, and stay safe out there, people.
Perfect. All right. I see no more questions, so we'll now move to close out today's webinar. We thank everyone for taking the time to join us, and I thank the speakers for taking the time to present. Should anyone have any follow-up questions for us, feel free to reach out to us at Compass IT Compliance, compassitc.com, or Spyglass at spyglassmtg.com. Thank you, everyone, and have a fantastic rest of your day.